So the ferry is delayed, and I thought I'd just share a few of my thoughts. There's something that is quite common for many people on the spiritual path. And it's not necessarily a negative thing, but in some ways it can seem like their spiritual journey becomes a worldly journey. And what happens is that we become associated with dharma centers. So in general, there's two terms. There's monastery, and then there's dharma center. And they're different. And most of what we get in the West are called dharma centers. It's usually just like a house or something with a monk in it, a Tibetan. And outside you can identify it because there'll be some Tibetan prayer flags hanging out or something like that. That's about all we have in the West. I mean, in a few places we do have actual monasteries or retreat centers. They're spread out across the country. But most of what we have are dharma centers. And so I think I've mentioned this before. There are what are called the three wheels of activity in the Buddha Dharma. And these are the three principal activities associated with a monastery. So the first one in Tibetan is called a shedra. Now, shedra is a monastic college. It's a university, basically. And you can get your master's or your PhD, the equivalent in the Buddha Dharma. And then there's what's called the drupdra, and that's the retreat center. Now, the difference is that a retreat center is where you focus on practice. So you focus on meditation, basically. And then the third wheel of activity is the wheel of work. And that's generally what happens in the big monastery itself. That's where there's lots of monks and they're busy doing jobs. Principally what they do is they collect money. They collect money to support the shedra and the drupdra, to support the monastic college and the retreat. So the monastery is where the faithful go and they burn incense or they give the name of a deceased relative to have prayers done. It's where you go for prayers and puja, that sort of thing. Now, in general, dharma centers are this third branch. They're the branch of activity associated with work or generating money. So in the West, most dharma centers, then they sell incense and prayer flags and books in English. That's quite common. And it's where the monastery, let's say the main monastery, which may be based in India or Nepal or Tibet or somewhere, has a connection with lay people. And it's the means by which they acquire funds to support their activities. Now, I have to say, some of these dharma centers are worse than others. And really, it's just an avenue for making money. And it's not certain what that money will be used for. There are means by which the lay person from the West can make a connection with a particular lineage or monastery, and also often with just a particular lama. So they're very sectarian, really. So it'll be Lama so-and-so's dharma centers. They'll have them all over the world. For example, Mingyur Rinpoche has centers everywhere. And generally what they do is somebody local is kind of faithful, and they'll offer their house to their Rinpoche. It's quite common. And then the Rinpoche will send a monk from the monastery to look after it. And they'll try to find ways to engage people. Now, if the Rinpoche is good, then they'll try to engage people by getting them interested in the Dharma. And there are some that aren't at all. They're just generating money to fund their enterprises. And they're quite negative people. You shouldn't be under any illusions that all Tibetan Lamas are great. I mean, people like the Dalai Lama are great. They are really superb individuals, being learned and also accomplished in practice. And they have compassion and love. Sadly, many people think that the Dalai Lama is a pedophile these days. That's because we have more trust in social media than we do in one of the most significant religious figures in the modern world. And that is the Dalai Lama. He's one of the most influential and significant spiritual figures that has existed in modern times. And yet there's a few posts on social media and people think he's a pedophile. It just shows where our minds are. We're totally worldly. Anyway, there are good lamas, there are not so good lamas, and they're downright con men. And they'll say things like, oh, I'm coming to the West to collect money for an orphanage, right? Sounds great. Orphanage. or to protect underprivileged women. And then they take their money, and what they do with it is they buy gifts for their girlfriends. This goes on. It mostly goes on in China, but it also goes on in the West. Some of these lamas aren't bad. They are interested in the Dharma. They're brought up in a monastery. They have faith in Buddhism, and they want to spread it. But the problem is they haven't conquered their own negative emotions or kleshas. And so that means they're kind of worldly, and they like making money. And so their motivation on the outside might seem good, but when it gets down to it, on the inside, then they just like wealth, right? They like to have a fancy car. And they also like to show off to other lamas. And I've seen this myself. There's a real competition between Tibetan lamas, and they like to show off their golden palaces, basically, golden temples. And so if they can collect more money and build bigger statues, then they get one up on some other lama and makes them feel big. And that's because they're interested in position and status and wealth and gold and that sort of thing. I mean, for God's sake, just look at the thrones they sit on. If you go to a Dharma teaching, usually the teacher is on a high golden throne, just covered in jewels. And that's not really the Dharma, right? I mean, you look at the Thai forest monks, for example. You know, they're nearly naked and they sleep out under the trees, you know. The Dalai Lama once pointed out the teaching throne of one of these Thai forest monks, one of these famous kind of lamas, I suppose. I don't know what they call them, spiritual friends, I guess. And it was just a rock sitting in the middle of the forest. And the reason why I sat on the rock is if you're sitting up a little bit higher, then everybody can see you. But there's a terrible tradition in Tibetan Buddhism of sitting on these huge, grandiose thrones. And then we see that, right? We see all the gold, the glitz, high thrones, and what we want to do is we want to give them loads of money. And it's actually quite a negative thing. There's a danger. The danger is that you can become associated with a Dharma center and then give your money and your labor, your volunteering time to support the activities of that center, and that basically it's pretty worldly. You know, it's slightly better than most worldly organizations because they're encouraging people to meditate and do Tara Puja and things like that. In general, you won't get an education. But sometimes then these funds can just be used to support the playboy, jet-setting lifestyle of a guru. And there's loads of them. Like I say, they don't have to actually be charlatans. They can be more or less good Buddhists, but be very worldly, haven't conquered their greed and their pride and that sort of thing. And so 50% of the money you give them gets misappropriated, goes to buying them fancy cars and upping their status in the spiritual world. And this is a big problem. And I've talked about this a lot. So how do you know? How do you know if your teacher is worldly or not? Well, you just have to look at the things they like. If they get really turned on by gold and jewels, then that's not such a good sign. If they live out in the woods, in a hut, in a mountain, and when you come to see them, they run away, then that's a bloody good sign that they're a real practitioner. What you want is a teacher who is a practitioner. And of course, not all of them can be practitioners. Or you want a teacher who's very learned. They have to be learned, but they also have to have compassion, and they shouldn't be proud. But then if you've got a teacher who's got nothing to give, basically at their center there's no education, all you do is do pujas once in a while, get no teachings. If there are teachings, it's all kind of a bit wayward, you know. They act up, act the siddha. I mean, what does it mean to act the siddha? It means to act like a bit of a clown, you know, to goof around, wear funny clothes and that sort of thing. I mean, it's not 100% certain that if they dress up, that they're a fake. I mean, there's Dzongso Khyentse Rinpoche. He's a very authentic teacher, and he's somebody who has a high level of meditation, but he does weird things. So it's not 100% certain that if they act in a strange way, that they are a charlatan. In general, you have to look at what's going on, what the people are like in that Dharma community, and what the teacher focuses on. And if they're giving people an education in the Dharma, then that's a really good sign, especially if it's free. If their teachings are free, that's a good sign. If you hear things like, I'll teach you sexual union practice, $150 a seat, or I'm teaching the Mahamudra, front seats, $300, then you should steer clear of that. You should be really wary of that. I mean, Taiseda Rinpoche and Mingyur Rinpoche both teach Mahamudra, but it doesn't have that kind of ugly look to it, like it's commercial. Really, what they're doing is very authentic. And you can tell it's very authentic because basically, if you want to get the actual inner teachings on the Mahamudra, then you're going to have to commit yourself to at least 6 years with them. And then it's not certain, right? It's like my teacher. If you want to go get Mahamudra teachings from him, then even after 10 years, he might not give you Mahamudra teachings. That is a really good sign. You look at the life story of Chato Rinpoche. He was an authentic Lama. People came to him all the time, begging for Mahamudra or Dzogchen teachings. They wanted all the highest stuff. The only thing he was interested in was saving the life of poor animals that were destined for slaughter, right? And he looked like a poor beggar. I mean, there's loads of stories about Chato Rinpoche. Well, he had a consort, right? So he had a girlfriend. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's part of his lineage. So he had this beautiful young consort. And there was an American guy or a British guy hanging around. He was helping out in the Dharma Center. And then one day the consort says, oh, I've fallen in love with this Western guy. They call him Inji. I'm going off to America, or I'm going off to the UK or something like that. And Chato Rinpoche said, okay, sure. Very good. And just let it go. He had no attachment whatsoever. And the funny thing is, after her relationship with this fine-looking, Englishman or whoever he was, went sour and everything went wrong, she came back begging to Chato Rinpoche and said, well, things didn't turn out so well. Can I come back, please? Chato Rinpoche was like, sure, whatever. Please be my guest. That is a sign of a Dharma practitioner. Open-minded, right? Not small-minded, accepting of karma, non-judgmental. For most of us, if that happened, we'd be furious, right? When she left in the first place, we'd be furious. And when she came back, asking to come back, we wouldn't have her back. But he did. I mean, there was another story about Chato Rinpoche. Again, it was somebody associated with the Labrang or with the community. He was helping with the money. I guess he was an accountant or something like that. And he embezzled everything. He took all their money. And so Chato Rinpoche's helpers, these monks, said, look, this Western guy stole all our money. What are we going to do? We got to call the police. And Chato Rinpoche said, stop, don't do that. It's our karma. We have to accept it. Can you imagine a Westerner, a CEO of a corporation doing that? No, they would be hungry for the guy's blood. They'd want him to go to jail for the rest of his life, not Chato Rinpoche. So this is what happens. Many Westerners, they're looking for a spiritual journey. They want advice because they're not happy, right? They see the suffering of samsara and they're looking for an alternative. And they looked into other things, right? Different types of health supplements, medicines, yoga, all different kinds of things. They're hungry. And what they do is they find a Dharma center. It feels nice to be part of a community. It is nice. And to be with other people who are practicing and meditating. There's a feeling of belonging. Kind of encourages one to practice the Dharma. But their practice can only go so far. Because that Dharma center doesn't have a lot to offer them. Basically, sitting in the morning and doing a bit of shine isn't going to get you enlightened. It won't get you out of samsara. It's kind of like a lifestyle change. That's about it. It's a hobby-level Dharma. So if you're really sincerely interested in awakening, then ultimately your association with the Dharma Center can hold you back. Because what will happen is you'll get involved, you'll volunteer, you'll start making offerings, and then eventually all your time and money will go to the Dharma Center. But it won't be bringing in any significant rewards in terms of your own practice. Even if the Dharma Center is well-minded. This has happened a lot in the West, and at first I thought it was because these kind of Tibetan lamas were so bad. Because they would just get people involved and then use them to build buildings, to carve statues, to work in the shop, generate money. What I've figured out in more recent times is that it's not so much that these teachers, these lamas, are actually trying to rip them off or use them. It's just that they don't have a means for helping them to awaken. And also they don't see the potential in those students. Because awakening is incredibly difficult. It's not easy, right? You're not going to sell some incense in a shop and get awakened. So the teachers or the lamas, they recognize this. And so what they try to do is employ those Westerners in some kind of virtue, to do something virtuous. So helping out in the center is virtuous. It's a very low-level virtue, but it's virtuous. Giving in generosity is also virtuous. Giving material things is a low level of generosity. The highest level of generosity is giving the dharma, teaching the dharma. But, giving a bit of money here and there, that is virtuous. And also, if they're sitting there doing shine in the morning, then they're not out the night before, getting drunk and taking drugs. And this happens for many people. For example, in Scotland, Samiling, we have many people who have suffered from drug addiction, poverty, violence, all kinds of things. And they've come to the center and it's transformed their lives. But it only takes them so far. It only takes them to the point of being a more or less stable or okay worldly person. Once you've got to that level of being okay, then you have to up your game. And it's at that point then you have to consider how you dedicate your time. It's got to go to your practice. You have to gain an education. You have to come to understand the Dharma, right? So you have to study. That means you've got to find somebody to study with. And so, for a few of my students, I tried to send them to Nepal. Because the culture, the infrastructure for learning the Dharma is all set up there. It's very difficult in the West. Just watching a few videos on YouTube isn't going to do it. You need personal one-to-one guidance from your teacher. And that doesn't happen in the West. Like I say, what we do is we do a bit of morning shine, right? We do a few pujas, ring a bell, bang a drum, that's about it. And we work in the gift shop. Or we make some offerings, do some volunteering. I'm not saying don't volunteer. Don't go to your Dharma center and say, Choga told me this is all rubbish. I'm leaving. Thank you very much. Because that's just going to cause problems. I'm not saying that. You have to avoid getting involved with charlatans who are just trying to use you. And there are plenty of them out there, so be careful. And then the medium grade lamas and teachers, well, they're Buddhists, but they're worldly. So it's probably best if you don't spend a lot of your time there. Find a place where you get teachings, where you're encouraged to practice, and you can be supported in doing retreat, even if that is just a 1-week retreat, or a 1-month retreat, or 6 months, whatever you can do. This sort of place that has the 3 wheels of study, practice, and also of work, then that's an authentic monastery. And there are authentic monasteries about. I mean, Samiling in Scotland is a good example of this, but they're few and far between. Once you've gained practice, once you know what you're doing, then you have to apply yourself. You have to remove yourself from these situations where your time will be used or distracted for other lesser activities. And then you have to apply yourself to your meditation with sincerity, with fervor for a long time in order to see the results of your meditation. There's no other way. If there was another way, Milarepa would have done it, right? And Milarepa was very capable. He was no dummy. But until you understand what you need to do, then you need help. You need support. So seek out those who are learned, who have got practice themselves, and have compassion. And they're not going to use you just to achieve their worldly aims, like to up their status in the international community of spiritual practitioners. And it's my sincere wish that you should achieve peace, happiness, and well-being, and progress swiftly along your spiritual journey to final awakening and liberation from samsara. And to further that end, then I'll do whatever I can. So like right now, I've got a few minutes while the ferry is delayed because of the weather. And so I could just have a rest, right? I've been working all week on the cabin. I'm tired. But instead, I decided that I would share a few of my thoughts for what it's worth. Maybe it's no benefit. I don't know. So that's about all I had to say. And until next time, and see you later.